Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Sarah and this is my granny era. And today I want to share with you guys all of the books that I read in December, and it is a lot. So I am not going to share all of the things that I talked about in my Ghost of Christmas Past Resurrecting a Tradition video. There's 5, I think, from the first part of December that I talked about in that video. I will just link that up here for you guys to find and you guys can watch that. I'm also not going to talk about the last few books that I read because after this monthly wrap-up video today, I am going to try doing weekly wrap-ups because I'm finding that I'm reading a lot more than I used to, and I can't have my wrap-up videos going on for, an hour. So I'm gonna do a weekly wrap-up. Sometime on a Sunday or a Monday is when those will be posted. They'll cover Saturday to Saturday, so ideally they'll be out on Sunday. So this is gonna be the last one of its kind. So I am saving the things that I read, since last Saturday. All right, so let's get into the books that I kind of read in between all of that. I have 5, 6, 7 here to share with you guys. Okay, so the first one, this one is kind of fun. I read this with one of my daughters. This is a Babysitter's Club number 100, Christie's Worst Idea. So if I would have read this when I was a kid, I probably would have had like a life crisis, but because I now know that all is well and there was another couple of hundred books published after this one, it's okay, because in this book, the Babysitter's Club, they decided to break up. And so, yeah, that would have broke my little 9-year-old heart. Although this didn't come out until, 96? So I was 16 by then. So it wouldn't have broken my heart. But I still would have probably had a little bit of anxiety. But anyway, I've been reading these with my 2 youngest daughters, and my youngest daughter and I finished this at the first part of December. And all is well. At the end, they decide to give it another go. If you're not familiar with the Babysitter's Club, that is a series of books that started coming out when I was probably about 7 or 8, maybe 7. And all through my childhood and then into, my teen years, and probably even after I was married. Like if number 100 was published when I was 16, there's like 300 or something in this series. So they went on well into my young adult years. So it's just kind of a staple of my childhood. It's all about this group of little girls who form a babysitting club in their community and all the things they get into. All right, let's get into the adult books. So the next one I read was Daniel Defoe's The Journal of the Plague Year. And this one went surprisingly quick for me. I guess I was just a little intimidated because I've been reading Robinson Crusoe with my son, and we've been going through it very slowly. The language and punctuation is pretty, archaic. So it can seem like it's going very slow, but this one really did move along pretty quickly for me, and I think mostly just because I was really into it. I really enjoy reading about this time of history, and while Defoe was writing a fictional story, he was writing it based on lots of research and journalism that he had done, and so it was kind of his way of telling the story of the plague in a historical fiction sort of way, but mostly nonfiction, right? The things that he talked about happened, or very similar things happened, and he just kind of wove it into this narrative from a fictional narrator, but it really reads like a non-fictional sort of journalist, diarist sort of account. So this book accounts the 1665 Great Plague of London that swept through the town, took almost 100,000 people very quickly. There's a lot of very interesting information in here, and it's all kind of scary too. It was really, just weird about it is this took place, right, like almost 400 years ago, and the practices that they put in place to take care of this plague, all the different things, really matched up with how the COVID pandemic was handled as well. I mean, people quarantined to their homes, arguments about cures, arguments about different kinds of medical advice, the dismissal or seemingly dismissal of natural remedies. There was quarantine camps. It's kind of like someone resurrected this book like as a manual for how to run a worldwide plague. It seemed like this narrator was really promoting ideas that would help the body sort of be able to fight off rather than create hospitable environments for sickness. He seemed to have a few not so mainstream ideas, yet it seemed like he had a very balanced and compassionate view on things. A couple of things that I remember from it that really stuck out to me was that at one point, they decided to quarantine people to their homes. They would hire soldiers to stand outside the doors and keep people from coming out. At one point, they had to start barricading the doors because the people would find ways to either overtake the soldier or, send the soldier off on some errand and escape or whatever. They wanted to get out of there. And one of the biggest reasons why, and this is the part that the narrator didn't find to be very compassionate, nor did I, but it's understandable. If a family, you have a family of, say you have a family of 6 people in the house, and just 1 or 2 of them are actually sick, they would quarantine everybody in the family and lock them all in there and not let them out. And so those who were not showing signs of sickness were not able to escape and go somewhere to hang out while the other families, recovered or died and they were able to come back to their homes. They just had to stay in there and eventually get the sickness and die with them. And I just found that to be horrible. But on the flip side, if they didn't have any way to tell whether or not these people were carrying this virus, and it was so killer, I guess, I don't know, that was so, devastating that it would quickly turn from, you wake up in the morning and you're fine till you die in the evening because it very quickly takes over your body, then they really didn't have a way, right, to know if these people were going to come out into the community and spread the virus. So I get it, but I don't think that would fly these days. I don't know. I don't know if there's enough soldiers. There's not enough soldiers in the US, that's for sure. But there was other interesting things in here. For one thing, when they are kind of writing out the rules, what they're going to do, the requirements for communities, they talked about how the graves shall be at least 6 foot deep. And I know that's, pretty much the common depth nowadays too. So I wonder if this was the first, I just have a note that says, I wonder if this was the first instance of this actually being a rule somewhere that they must be buried 6 feet deep. So not that I necessarily want to research that, but it's just something I'm interested in wondering. I found it was interesting that they marked the houses of the sick with a red cross, a foot long, in the middle of the door. It made me think about Passover. Kind of backwards though, right? I took a lot of notes. I did a lot of markings in this book. So it's just a lot of things that really made me think. I mean, people that were sick or had lost all their family members and didn't, have the will to live anymore, they would just throw themselves into these open burial pits. And then they would just die in there, either because they were sick or because they were exposed or they got the sickness being in there. But it was just, it just must have been horrific because it all happened so quickly. It talked a lot about how people weren't prepared. They hadn't stored up provisions. And so they were going out and, trying to procure food and other things for themselves. And so, exposing others to sickness, exposing themselves to sickness, and there were shortages on goods. No different than what we went through, right? And I guess, I don't know why that was shocking to me, but, preppers warn about that now. Make sure that you are stocked up for mass, buying sprees of people who are scared, and it's wise, right? So there were even preppers in those days too. It said that the rich had their things stored away. It talks about how they were powerless to defend themselves against looters, and we have the same issues going on. I think so much changed after the COVID pandemic for us. So much about just the way we exist in our communities and the levels of anxiety and even fear that we're dealing with daily now. A lot changed then. That was probably the understatement of the year. One thing I also thought was interesting that I didn't really think about during our pandemic was, he says that since all trades were stopped and employment was ceased, the bread of the poor was cut off. And so it didn't occur to me, and I wonder now how much charities actually lost during this time, because people were feeling like they couldn't even afford to take care of their own families. How much, did we stop giving to charities during that time? It's very interesting. So anyway, there's a lot in here. I have a lot of things marked. I've got stuff printed out that I was reading about it. It's all just a very interesting story and very much parallels what we went through. So it was definitely worthwhile to read. I was really glad that I read this. I gave it 4 stars, and yeah, I'll be keeping that for later, I don't know, reference, and probably will read it again another 10 years or so. All right, the next book I read is called A Spinner in the Sun by Myrtle Reed. Now, I wasn't so sure about this, and I don't even know where I got this, but this is one of those companies. It's out of the UK that they print like out of print books. I reintroduce you to them. And so I somehow got a hold of this, and I loved this book. I gave it 5 stars. It just tells the story of you gotta read this book, you guys, because I'm not going to tell you like the major plot twist in this book, but it's a good one, and it caught me off guard, and it is hard to catch me off guard. So basically there's this girl that comes back to her hometown after having been away for 20 years. She has been badly burnt. In her early years, when she was living in this town, she was engaged to be married, and her fiance were doing science experiments. He was a, I don't know, chemist or something, and they were doing science experiments, and she saved him from this explosion in the lab, and ended up being burnt and straight to the hospital. She'd been in hospital for a long time. The guy heard that she had been badly burnt, and he just dropped her, and she never saw him again. He called off the engagement, called off everything, and he couldn't deal with the fact that she would be so horribly disfigured, and so he left her. And so she leaves town. She's gone for 20 years. In the meantime, he got married, had a kid, and then, stayed in town. He's running like a doctor. I think he's a doctor, and his now grown son is a doctor. When she comes back to town, she does see him again. It's not happy, but it basically tells the story of her and how she has confined herself for all these years because of what had happened to her, and how she didn't feel like she could go out into society and be who she used to be, and all of the things, that she's dealing with in there. But there is a major twist in this book that definitely catches you off guard. And I got to that part when I was just kind of casually reading it in the Walmart parking lot. I was waiting for my daughters who had gone in shopping, and I just, like, when it happened, I was like audibly, I was just like, what? I felt like David Tennant in Doctor Who, because I was just like, what? I just put the book down, and I'm like, I just sat there just like staring at his face for the longest time, because processing this shock. So I don't know, maybe there's foreshadowing and I'm the only person who's ever been shocked by this, but I don't think so. I think it was just a stinking good little twist there. So tells a great story. Once you get to that part, you realize, oh, then like the whole like morality of the story comes together, and anyway, it was fantastic. Published in 1906. So are we still in the Romantic period? I'm not exactly sure. But so it has that, melodramatic feel. So the next one I read was A Month in the Country by J.L. Carr. Now, I have heard a lot of good stuff about this book, and I know there's people on here who love the story. I didn't like it so much. I'm sorry. I only gave it 3 stars. So I liked the atmosphere of it. I thought it was well written, and I liked, just the atmospheric vibe of it all. But I did not like the story, and I did not really like any of the characters. What I did love about it, though, was it has to do with art. There's this guy who has been commissioned to come to this little town, little village, and restore this medieval art that is at a church. It's like a wall mural thing. and he's there to restore it. And so there was a lot of information just about that process and you know, what the topic of the mural was and those sorts of things. And all of that I loved. I was reminded of the 12th century wall art in Winchester Cathedral, which is the only place I have seen something like this, I think, other than there might be stuff in Bath, like at the Baths, I can't remember, but I know that I've seen 12th century wall art in Winchester Cathedral, and I've always thought that was just really cool, really neat to look at and wonder about. And so that's what I had in my head as I was reading this was, you know, that's what the wall art in my mind looked like, was what I had seen at Winchester. But I just couldn't get into the actual story or like any of the people in it really. So yeah, 3 stars for me. I didn't end up keeping it in my library. I feel kind of guilty about that. Every time one of you mentions it, I'm gonna feel guilty about it, but that's the way it is. All right, moving on. All right, so next up was a 5-star read for me. Surprisingly, a 5-star read coming from a inspirational fiction book, Christian fiction. So I have whined about that on this channel before, and I still haven't made my video about why I struggle with Christian inspirational fiction. But this one surprised me. So I was going through, I was doing an unhaul, getting ready for the new year, and I had a big stack of books on my TBR that I was getting ready to list online to trade on paperback swap. And this one ended up having like 36 people wishing for it. And I was like, okay, why are so many people wishing for this book? Maybe I should check it out. So I sat down right there in the middle of my unhaul and started reading it, and I was immediately hooked, and I ended up reading the whole thing like at every moment I could get, finished it pretty quick. So it tells the story of a young woman in her probably, I don't know, early 20s or something. In 1911, she goes to stay with a family member named Cora Wilson Stewart. Now, Cora Wilson Stewart is an actual historical figure from American history. She was a superintendent of schools in a county in Kentucky, kind of in the hill country, and she basically helped to lead an adult literacy movement in that area and kind of changed the thinking about adult literacy here in America. You know, at least got that conversation going. So in the story, her, you know, relation comes to stay with her. She's from the city, and she has all kinds of shocking encounters with these, you know, hillbillies in the mountains of Appalachia. And she's shocked at the fact that they can't read. And so she starts out kind of like being a transcriber. Like, they will dictate a letter to her, she'll write it out, send it to their loved one will send back a letter, and she'll read it to them, get their response, write it out, and she basically just serves as that conduit so that these people can communicate with people who have moved away, even though they can't read or write. So that's what the story kind of goes, right, with this young woman. But in reality, this really did happen, similar things in a county in, I think it's Rowan County in Kentucky, in 1900s, early 1900s. And so I'm very interested in looking for the biography of Cora Wilson Stewart and reading about, you know, the things that she did there to help this movement. But what I found was very interesting was at this time, people believed that sort of the window for learning sort of closed up around the age of 18. So anything you were going to learn, you needed to learn by the time you were 18, because your mind was going to close up and you weren't going to learn anything else. And that's very interesting, and we know that that's not true. I myself have had at least one major time where my reading comprehension just shot up in my early 30s, right about the time I was 33. Something changed in me, and I just started being able to read things and understand things that I could not get before. So, I mean, that's, you know, relatively late in life to have a major, you know, reading comprehension jump. And I kind of feel like I might be going through one again now. I'm 45, and I don't know, maybe it's just a change in what I enjoy reading, or maybe I'm just kind of lightening up a little bit, but I'm finding that I'm reading a lot of things I didn't read before, and I'm, you know, tolerating them better than I used to. I don't know, that's a whole side note there, but I thought that that was interesting that that was a belief, and I wonder if that's why, you know, 18 is the age of adulthood. Is that why that's the age that, you know, most people can leave school? If you're 18, you can leave even if you haven't graduated. I think now it's 16, but anyway, that was just an interesting thought. Another thing that really struck me in this book was the author spends a lot of time talking about language. She has kind of like a glossary of terms in the book that you learn what certain words or phrases mean to the people of Appalachia. And then she uses them throughout the story. And as I was reading through, I was like, you know what? This is how like my mom's whole side of the family talks, and how I grew up talking, and phrases that I still use, and even just pronunciations. And I was like, are we from Appalachia? So then all of a sudden I was like, well, duh. I went on to Ancestry.com just to kind of confirm what I had remembered. And yes, actually, we actually do have at least 3 generations in the 18th and 19th century of ancestors who lived in the county just north of Rowan County, Kentucky. So yeah, I have Appalachian people in my ancestry for at least 3 generations, and that's enough to start passing down some funky phrases and pronunciations. So I don't know, I've always been interested in reading about the people of this part of the nation, and perhaps that is why. All right, after that I read The Canterville Ghost by Oscar Wilde. I was taking place in the Ghost of Christmas Past, Resurrecting a Tradition reading event that Vin at Revenant Reads started up. It sounds like he's going to do this every December, so be watching for that next December. And I'll make a video next late November to talk about it again and invite everyone to join. So anyway, I thought I was all done reading for that, and you know, the first part of the month, I think I went up to like December 10th, and then I was like, all right, I'm gonna move on to other stuff now. But I was on the Voxer group, and they kept mentioning this story by Oscar Wilde called The Canterville Ghost, and so I was like, all right, fine. And so I printed it off of Project Gutenberg and read it, and it was a fun story. It's basically a ghost story turned on its head. Instead of the people being haunted by the ghost, they kind of harassed the ghost, and that was really fun. So I enjoyed reading through that one. I won't tell too much, right, because it's a short story and I don't want to give anything away. But you guys can go on to Project Gutenberg if you don't have it, you know, look for that there. Ooh, I think it's starting to rain out here. If it was a little colder, we'd have snow. All right, the next book I read, I did not enjoy this. I only give it 1 star, just because I don't like to leave things with like no stars. So I gave it a star. It's called Everything I Never Told You by Celeste Ng. And this just like hit every trigger that I have. I absolutely hated it, and I really regret picking it up at Christmas time. This story is like the perfect case story for different people's reactions to trauma. This family loses their daughter to an unexplainable death, and then they each deal with things differently. So it's going to be a trigger for anybody who's ever gone through anything traumatic. So I don't read it. Just don't. I didn't enjoy it at all. It's horrible. It's horrible. Ugh. I finished it. I forced myself to read it, and then I just laid down on my bed and sang Christmas songs to myself while crying. It was bad. I can't even recommend it. Yeah. Okay, we're gonna move on. I did not enjoy that story. All right, next up. This was kind of a surprise and pretty silly, actually. I found this. I went out on Christmas Eve because, like I told you guys in a different video, I haven't celebrated Christmas for like 4 years. And this year we didn't necessarily like go all out celebrating Christmas, but we just decided to stop not celebrating it, if that makes any sense. So I didn't have any Christmas books. I wanted some, and so I went to Barnes & Noble on Christmas Eve, my daughter and I got just a big old stack. And I didn't even read, I probably read half of them, but that means I have some for next year, right? So I found this book. It's called The Night Before Christmas. It is not 'Twas the Night Before Christmas, which is the Clement Seymour poem, which is a totally different thing. This is by Nikolai Gogol. I guess he's a super famous Russian author. And this book was written in 1831. It is a weird story. I don't even know what to make of this. Either I was super distracted or this story's all over the place. Maybe a little bit of both, but it's got all kinds of non-Christmassy elements in it. It's not really even a Christmas story other than it takes place on Christmas Eve. So you've got this guy Vacula. He and the devil are both in love with Oksana, the most beautiful girl in the village. Oksana is like super spoiled and just like sits on a tuffet and eats curds and whey, sort of a thing. And so there's like, the devil releases a snowstorm to block Vacula from getting to Oksana, and all kinds of other things. Like, it's just all over the place. It's kind of funny. It's kind of, I don't know. I did not enjoy it. I mean, I gave it 1 star. I was not impressed. So that was 2 1-star reads in a row. I was feeling a little bummed about December by that point. Then the gift giving season started. So my husband ended up getting me this Star Over Bethlehem by Agatha Christie Malawan. And I was just so excited that he got me this. So this was in my favorite bookstore down in Tawnytown. And it was on the like rare books shelf for $40. It's a first edition by Agatha Christie and printed in the UK, and I guess it must be rare over here. So he went and got that for me as a gift, which was super kind. I think we ended up getting it for $30 because I get a 25% discount for being a homeschool mom. But anyway, so I read through these stories and they were so good. So many of them were really touching. And the thing that I really loved about them was that Agatha Christie, she approached these subjects, which were all the Christmassy things, right? Like goodwill toward men, all that kind of stuff. She approached them from a point of view that is slightly cynical. It's kind of how I feel about faith and all the things. Basically the idea that I can't stand self-righteous people, self-righteous behavior, self-righteous thinking, ignorant thinking, and I know I need to be more patient, and I know I need to understand that everybody is just where they are, but when you're calling yourself by the name of the God of the Bible, yet you're acting so far in contrast to who he is and how he wants us to be, it's so frustrating to me. Like, I feel like I just can't let it go. Like, I just want to take people and shake them and be like, why are you acting like this? This is what it means to take the Lord's name in vain. Taking his name in vain, right? If we're going to take his name, we need to act like him. And so she just kind of brings that up in various ways, which is interesting, right? Because I don't know how many people really think of Agatha Christie as like a, Christian person so much. But I do think it was there. I think that she was just quiet about it. And I think that she saw humanity, and she didn't forget about humanity, even though she herself may have been following her God in a certain way. She didn't forget that not everybody does that, and that's okay. Eternally, if you don't, eternally, no, maybe not so much if you do believe what the Bible has to say about those, who don't follow God and obey his instructions, then no, it's not so good for eternity. But for right now, while everybody still has a chance, you can't just walk around in self-righteousness, right? You can't just walk around with your nose in the air and, oh, I'm preaching. Okay. Anyway, I really like this book of stories. All of them were brand new to me. I don't even have a favorite. They were just all good in randomly different ways. It was like, when you read a story collection from a person, they all kind of seem the same. Like, you expect them all to sort of seem the same. And it almost seemed like lots of different people were writing all of these stories. She was able to write from different narrative perspectives, and just a genius, And the thing about Agatha Christie is when I read her crime novels, especially after watching, because I watched everything on TV first, I've always thought, these are kind of basic. Like, they're really simple. They're not as involved and deep as I guess I thought they would have been. But I think that was the genius of Agatha Christie, right? Thinking of everybody. Like, I gotta be available for everybody. I gotta be accessible to everybody. And I got that same impression from these stories in this little book. They were all basically faith-based stories, but they're accessible to everybody. I think that's what I was trying to say in all that other rambling before. She's just an accessible person, and I want to be an accessible person, right? I don't want my faith to be something that blocks people from being able to connect with me. I want it to be something that because of my faith, I open myself up to people, right? And I am accessible to them. Okay. Last book that I read for that little season of December that I was telling you I was going to talk about was The Nutcracker by Alexander Dumas. Now, this is a retelling. The first one apparently was told by E.T.A. Hoffman. We are going to read that in December for our children's classic read-along. But I found this beautiful copy and I was taken in But the story, I did not appreciate. It started off, you know, how I was expecting, it ended how I was expecting, but the middle was just boring, to put it nicely. Very dull, and just, I don't know, it wasn't that magical story of the Nutcracker. It wasn't the ballet. So maybe I prefer the ballet version. But we'll read Hoffman this December and see. The story was creepy. It was just like twisted and rude in a lot of places. I'm a little nervous. Am I gonna like the writing of Alexander Dumas? I've never read anything else by him, and I'm just not too sure that I'm gonna like it. But I didn't like this at all. So we'll read the Nutcracker story from Hoffman in December, and then we can do a comparative study. But this is just going to sit on my shelf and look pretty, I think, next year. I don't think I can pick it up again. All right, that is my December wrap up for the most part. Check out that video about the Ghost of Christmas Past reading event that we did if you're interested, and then I will also put out that weekly update tomorrow, hopefully, and talk about the stuff that I read at the end of December and the first part of January. Hey, I hope everybody is having a great day. I will see you guys soon. Bye-bye.